Now I'm happy to welcome Thomas here, because he was already at sec4dev last year at our online version. And Thomas is a security analyst with more than 20 years of experience. He's an AI enthusiast and Python hacker. He's curious about neuroscience, consciousness studies, and physics. And he loves to meditate in nature. At least I saw that on your Twitter account, because you shared a really nice picture, and I think it was the National Park Donauauen, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, I got it. So you like to meditate there. So actually, if you're not from Vienna and you have some time left tomorrow, Vienna has a national park. So a part of the National Park Donauauen is part of Vienna. And it's really, really beautiful. And yeah, maybe you can check it out tomorrow. So, Thomas is Principal Security Consultant at SecConsult here in Vienna. And yeah, he will speak about the OWASP application security verification standards. And welcome with me, Thomas Kerbl.
Yeah, thanks for having me here at the sec4dev. It's great to be back. I was really looking forward to this conference to attend many of the... Yeah, it should be on. Let me check. It actually is on. Can you hear me? I actually planned to make some really weird joke about the mute button after all this COVID stuff. Actually, we managed to do it nevertheless. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Sound is good? Yes. Kinda? Okay. So, again, welcome to my presentation today. I was really looking forward to all the amazing talks and to all the amazing speakers on this conference. Unfortunately, my schedule was quite unforgiving this week, and so yeah, I just made it in time to finally arrive for my own talk, and I missed most of the cool stuff, unfortunately. But now I'm here. I'm really happy to be here in flesh and blood finally and see real faces, not those rather boring camera lenses that I'm used to. So let's get right into it. If I get this thing to work, yeah, here we are. I brought something with me, the OWASP ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard. I consider it a treasure chest for web application security because many see it as some kind of checklist for security audits and penetration tests and things like this, but you can use it for many, many other aspects in secure software development. Yeah, we already had some introduction about me. If you have any questions you don't want to ask here is my contact information. Drop me a message on Twitter or send me an email. Yeah, you will find this contact information in the handout as well. So, for those of you who have never seen the Application Security Verification Standard before, the ASVS, a really quick introduction so that we're all on the same level when talking about this topic. First of all, what's the ASVS? For simple words, Application Security Verification Standard. Okay, it's a standard, so check. Application, it's from OWASP. OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, we have this W in there, web application. You can forget about that. It's not about web applications. You can use this for all your applications as you see fit. So, whatever applications you're developing, except for mobile applications, there's a dedicated standard for this, the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard. You want to go pick up the mobile version, otherwise the ASVS is for you. As you can see, we have 14 different chapters, starting with a more process orientation, talking about architecture, design, and threat modeling, making some specific recommendations how you should approach your secure software development processes. But from there down, from the 2nd to the 14th chapter, it's basically technical verification requirements for your applications. If you take a look, if you download it, it's totally free, of course, from OWASP, a free resource that you can get at the click of a button. That's what you are presented with. Those 14 chapters are subdivided into sections that look like this. Basically, you have some kind of initial guidance, a brief description what's in this chapter. What's really important here is there's a reason given why you want to have those types of requirements. Because what I've seen in the past very, very often that you are faced with a lot of different security requirements without any reason at all. So you don't really understand why you should actually implement this stuff. Here the reason is given, and you can deduce for yourself if that's applicable for you or not. This one's important here, but also has a little caveat. There are 3 levels of every requirement here is assigned one of those 3 levels. Level 1 basically means that's for everything. So there is no application or no requirement at level 1 that should not be checked for any of the applications. So even if you have an application you don't really care about, level 1 should be the absolute baseline. But when we're reaching level 2, that's in my opinion the standard for most applications. So if you're not really sure what's the right level for you, you should most likely go towards level 2. And if you're really level 3 is relevant for you, you can be pretty confident that you already know it. So for example, if you're working for the military industry and have critical applications that you develop, if you're working in critical infrastructure, banking, insurance, and things like this, that's where L3 is really relevant. But of course, it's much more intensive to do all these verifications in this specific category. Why is there a caveat in this regard? We are currently with version 4.0.3, I guess, and version 5 is in the making. So according to the official timeline, we are talking about end of the year when version 5 is released. I'm most likely expected to hit us in 2023, but whatever the timing may be, those levels will be reworked. So they will be made very specific and easier to work with. You also find the CWE, the Common Weakness Enumeration Database link here. So you don't only have a very high-level verification requirement, but also in-depth additional knowledge chain basically linked to the specific requirement that you can look up online very easily. And here on the bottom, finally, also more implementation guidance. Here specifically, we see the OWASP testing guide referenced and the OWASP cheat sheet series, both very, very good documents that you can utilize in your software development practices. Yeah, and of course, the meat of everything is in here. It's the different verification requirements. I haven't counted them. I think it's something in the ballpark around 200 specific requirements. But of course, you have to select those that are appropriate for your applications. So it's nice to have the standard, to know about the standard, but how do you actually integrate this standard in your key activities in secure software development? Initially, when I developed those slides, I had the top 3 pain points in software development. I want to be honest with you, those are not the top 3, because the top 3 usually is you have very tight deadlines and security is just an afterthought. The second big problem is often that you don't have the budget, and the third one is that you're often lacking the expertise in specific areas to actually implement those security requirements properly. But having said that, there are also 3 other areas that I'm seeing very, very often when doing maturity level assessments. In my day-to-day work, I'm often out at the customer and talking to the developers and making sure that their software development processes are state-of-the-art and showing them if there are any room for improvement. And those 3 areas I'm seeing very, very often. First of all, unspecific or missing security requirements. Those of you who have seen me talk before, it's one of the most important topics for me, having really good and proper security requirement engineering in place, because without you don't have the necessary guidance, you don't have the foundation to build your application design upon. There's also a lack of security guidance during implementation. Many developers have a rough idea about the requirements, but requirements tell you what needs to be done. They don't tell you how to do it. So you need some kind of guidance to actually implement those requirements in your architecture and in your application in the end. And missing validation criteria for security controls. So let's say you have proper requirements, you have proper implementation guidance, but this doesn't mean that nothing can go wrong. Sure, things can go wrong, and you need to make sure to catch those bugs before they go into production. So you need also proper security validation for your security controls. And all of this can be derived from the ASVS if you use it properly. So let's dig into it. Unspecific or missing security requirements. I get PTSD when I see security requirements like those, and I'm pretty confident that many of you have seen similar security requirements in the past. Ensure that confidentiality and integrity cannot be compromised. I want to be honest with you, it's not wrong, but it's also not helpful. If you're someone who really understands what this means and you know by heart in detail what you need to do to actually fulfill this requirement, you don't need this requirement. It will be second nature to you. If you don't know what this means, well, this isn't helpful at all. So I would ask myself as a developer, as an architect, what do I do with this requirement? Can we be a little bit more specific, please? And maybe I have some homegrown security controls. Maybe I have some frameworks in place, but are they sufficient for this broad security requirement? I honestly can't tell. So wouldn't it be great to have a complete list of all the necessary technical security controls needed for all my security relevant functions? Of course, it would be cool to have something, and the OWASP ASVS is already very close to that. So basically, you can flip the verification requirements on their head, and instead of saying verify that, just say implement that or ensure that, and this can be a good starting point for your more tailored security requirements for your application. Lack of security guidance during implementation. That's also quite an interesting one, because when I'm doing my maturity level assessments, once you have done them often, when you've done them often enough, you realize some patterns and you see the same things over and over and over and over again. And usually we like to do this based on OWASP SAM, the software assurance maturity model. And we're talking about security requirements and threat modeling and stuff like this. And many software developing companies who have not done this before are often lacking in this area and have to admit, no, we don't have this, we don't have this. Yeah, we have a maturity level of 0.2, something like this, and everyone is down. And then I mentioned the magical word. I'm talking about secure coding guidelines, and what the developers are hearing are coding guidelines, and they say, yes, finally we have coding guidelines, here we can score. Unfortunately, what I get then is some coding guidelines with general style guide, naming convention for variables, and we have even rules for code complexity. And again, don't get me wrong, those things are not wrong, but in regard to security, not really helpful. Of course, if you have limits for your code complexity, it makes it much more easy to avoid vulnerabilities in the first place or to detect them if they should slip in, but those are not secure coding guidelines. So how can you make sure to follow the best practices when it comes to those specific requirements for your application? Again, the OWASP ASVS is a very good starting point for you, because as we have seen in the beginning, you have very specific links to your very specific security requirements. So if you're not sure how to implement it with your specific technology, a link to the cheat sheet from OWASP, for example, can be very helpful to find the right source to get technology-specific guidance for your specific technology stack. And maybe you even take an additional step and derive your own security framework based on those standards. This would be the gold version, if you want to call it this, where you really have a pre-built security pattern for your applications that you can reuse over and over and fulfill specific security requirements that are important for you. So yeah, wouldn't it be great to have detailed guidelines regarding the implementation of specific security mechanisms? Again, OWASP ASVS is a good tool for you. And the third one I've mentioned, lacking security verification controls. This is almost word for word, a quote from one of my customers. Our code scanner gives us a green light, and our test team did not stumble over any severe vulnerabilities either, and yeah, we passed our security check. Sounds good, but if you dig a little bit deeper, you realize the security tool they were using was more of a software quality measuring tool, had some security checks on top so that they can sell it as a security scanner as well. But in the end, if you take on the one hand the ASVS, all the security verification controls and the capabilities of this specific scanning tool, you realized, yeah, there was a really, really big significant gap in between. And the test team actually were not experienced penetration testers or code reviewers, but the normal, so to speak, test team with little security experience, no proper guidance, no structure to perform those checks, and they actually had some initial training how to use the Burp Suite, which is actually a quite complex tool if you dig deeper into it and really want to use it. And they experimented a little bit, tried some patterns, and if the application didn't react funky, they said, yeah, we didn't find anything major, and that was the security check. So it would be great if you use the ASVS to use it as a complete checklist with validation criteria to benchmark your security tools, actually see can the tool verify those things required by the ASVS, and also guide your security testing team for the manual security tests. As a bonus, what's also great is if you're doing this with external third parties companies, you often have the issue that you get 3 different you offer RFP and you get 3 totally different quotes and you can't really compare them. You get, this penetration test cost me 10,000 euro, this cost me 15, this 100,000 euro, and you have no idea which is of better quality. If you specify something like, I want a security audit based on OWASP ASVS level 2, it's very well defined what you will get, and you can easily compare different offers for such security audits. So how do you actually implement this in your daily work? I brought one example with me here for file uploads, but you can basically use anything that's relevant for your application. It depends on your development lifecycle. Maybe you're working with user stories, and you should initially check if the requirements given by the OWASP ASVS are relevant for specific stories. Might be some quality criteria in those user stories, might be acceptance criteria, maybe you have standalone non-functional requirements based on the ASVS. It's basically up to you and your process how you want to integrate this. But at this stage in time, I highly recommend that you ensure that you don't lose the link between the actual requirements and the linkage to the technical deep dives given in the OWASP ASVS. Because the people who actually need to implement those requirements are really, really glad if they have this link in place and can look deeper into those informations when they need it. I'm also a big fan of test-driven software development. So if you can, at this stage, use this information to actually create test cases in advance, maybe automated test cases if this is possible, or at least some kind of checklist where it says this and that check has to be done to actually verify the specific security requirement. Well, you are honestly several steps ahead of the herd, but that's actually a good thing. So that's what I would recommend in this regard. Let me take a quick look at my clock. So I think we're good to go. Few words about certification. I don't think that I have to make much marketing for certification in this room. We all know that supply chain security and verification is very important in this field. We had, especially during the last years, several events that showed us how important it is to, as a software developing company, to show ideally certified from a third party independently that the application is state of the art when it comes to security. But also, if I'm procuring software, I need some kind of method to put my trust on. It's always dangerous to blindly trust a company just because they tell me, yeah, we know about OWASP and we are fully compliant and we do this and that, if there is no proper validation in place. So the application security verification standard at its heart would be perfect for this because we have all the validation criteria in there. We have 3 different levels. You can fine-tune it and really map it to your application as you see fit. The only negative thing or the problem here is there is no certification scheme at the moment. So there is no official certification. The good thing is that OWASP has no problem with certification. They say if any company wants to come out and create some certification scheme and release certifications based on ASVS, that's totally fine for them. And so we decided, that's a pretty new brainchild of ours, that we want to create an open framework that would finally allow this type of certifications. What do I mean with open framework? The idea here is that we can, that we specify, together with the OWASP community, very specific requirements that have to be fulfilled for a certificate to be valid. So You can't simply say, oh yeah, I downloaded the ASVS and I scrolled through it and I didn't find anything that looked fishy in regards to my application and I'm self-certified in my application. Of course, this can't work out. But there are different approaches you can take. For example, when we're talking about level 1 application security, this can be fully black box penetration tested. You don't need access to the source code, you don't need access to the configuration, you don't need to pester the developers themselves as a security tester. You can do this relatively efficient and separated. Of course, security assurance is limited. We are talking about level 1, of course. But this can be done, and having such a pen test under specific guidelines could enable you to create such kind of certification. You can do this for level 2, for level 3 as well. You can have some type of fine-tuning in there. As I've said, we're just thinking about this, developing this, talking with some friendly, trusted customers, so to speak, about this idea and see if that's even interesting for the industry. But my invitation is, you have my contact information. If you're interested to give your input on something like this, even is it valuable or just saying, I don't care about any type of certification, be it ASVS or anything else, that's also very helpful input. We're currently in this phase of reaching out and seeing if that's an interesting idea. And yeah, once we are confident that that's a good thing, we would open it up, maybe release it on some GitHub infrastructure, something like this, together with OWASP. So this shouldn't be a sec consult or framework, this will be an OWASP framework. And yeah, so my invitation to you is, if this sounds interesting, creating such a trust mark, yeah, reach out to me and let me know what you think about this. If you are interested in being compliant with ASVS or even thinking about certification, you should start early on in your development process. So, I think I don't tell you anything new when I say that it's important that you need to address security early on, of course. But especially when we're talking about the first chapter that I showed you, when we're talking about threat modeling, when we're talking about secure software development processes for your applications, you can't build this in afterwards. So if you want to show compliance with level 2 or level 3, those are necessarily part of the deal. So you need to consider this early in your development stages. Of course, you can always say, we didn't do this, but we want to have this verification. There will definitely be variants possible to do this, but it, of course, would be great to have everything in place right from the beginning. Always a good idea to have some kind of pre-assessment before you go into any code reviews or stuff like this, to just make sure that you're not wasting your time, because you're far away from anything that's even close to being considered state-of-the-art. So this always makes sense. And afterwards, you really need this knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer is crucial. What's always very important to me when talking about security verification is the cooperation between the developing teams and the security testers. If they do not work together, you are missing out a lot. I've seen this in real life quite often, and I don't want to go on the usual rant here because I've done this in the past. Please, 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 there is no good reason to not share any information or share all the information about your applications with your security test team. If you don't do this, you expect them to do their best possible job, but you withheld intentional information from them, does not fit. So even here, having some kind of knowledge transfer workshops makes a lot of sense to give the security tester, the auditor, the certifier, however you want to call them, the ability to actually perform such an assessment. Yeah, and further on you have the penetration test, code reviews, and specific workshops depending on your applications, depending on your certification level and stuff like this. And yeah, every company, SecConsult might offer such a service, but all our competitors may use this open framework as well. They might be able to create some kind of certification package. Maybe you get some cool trust mark, maybe some diploma you can put on your wall on the application or something like this. All the marketing stuff on top, and of course there's presentations and stuff like this. But the main idea here is initial knowledge transfer is crucial, and working together for these certifications is really, really important. That's the point that I want to drive home here. Last but not least, a couple of speculations what's in the future of the ASVS. So first of all, the obvious thing, we are working on version 5 at the moment, or when I'm saying we, the OWASP, that's not my intention. The OWASP Foundation is working on version 5 quite intensely at the moment. As I have said, we will be going live with this end of the year, probably next year. I personally think that certification based on ASVS level 2 will become a recognized seal of approval. I might be too optimistic about this, granted, but the idea is having level 2, or whatever level 2 will be called in the new version, is the standard most application wants to have. And if you want to procure application, or if you want to sell your applications and show that you are compliant with state-of-the-art security, level 2 is the way to go. And having this certified based on this trust mark is additional trust from a third party. There is also some activities currently from CREST concerning accreditation of security auditing companies. So in the future, if this gets released, you might not be able to say, oh, I think it's totally cool to offer such audits, but you actually have to pass some kind of CREST-based accreditation process before you can actually do this. I'm still torn if I think that's a good or a bad thing. Of course, it makes it easier to find good companies to do this. On the other hand, entry barrier is higher. I've worked a lot with Austrian Standard for, I think, over 15 years now with Austrian Standards here in Austria for application security standardization. And what I've learned is that the most crucial aspect of application security is adoption. And if you limit the scope here too much, and if you make the entry barrier too high, this thing definitely won't fly. So I'm still torn if it's a good thing or not. There's nothing on the horizon yet, but what I personally would like to see are new flavors of the ASVS. I've told you before, there's the mobile application security verification standard, but I also do see potential for other areas. For example, when we're talking about Web3 and smart contract security, that's a totally new beast that we have to tackle. Developing smart contracts in a secure fashion, ASVS definitely is too little. There are so many more relevant patterns that you need to consider. So I don't know anyone who is willing to tackle this beast yet, but it would be definitely a cool thing to have. And maybe if someone is interested in this topic, this might be might be a good spark to follow. What's also quite interesting, OT security, IoT security, also something that's, in my opinion, not fully addressed by the normal ASVS standard. So some OT-related version of the ASVS would also be quite cool. The last point actually was intended as a joke, but I've realized it isn't funny at all, so we'll just skip over it. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact me at any time. We now have the possibility to do the question from the audience directly. But before we go to the questions, I have one wish to you. If anything of those things I've talked to you today is interesting, if the ASVS is something you would consider valuable, set yourself a reminder in your phone, in your to-do list, in your schedule. When you're hitting the office next week, please, please, please download the ASVS, totally free from the OWASP website, scroll through it, see if there is anything in there that you can use for your software development, because if even just a couple of you are doing this, I'm quite confident that this hour I've spent today for the presentation was very well spent, and it would be cool to go forward in a more secure fashion when it comes to application development based on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks.
I think maybe some of you can do that, right? To send you an email. So we have a lot of questions actually, and I will start with the first one. I've used the security requirements checklist based on ASVS, but it turned out to be so long that it never got used efficiently. Any advice on its effective use?
Yes, thank you. Great question. because you might be overwhelmed. So that's a really thing maybe I should have mentioned before. You might actually be overwhelmed if you set your reminder and if you download it next week and you open the document and you see, fuck, there are 14 chapters in there, and they are quite extensive. I've managed almost 200 security requirements in there. So you need to be quite selective about them. Don't just say, oh, L3 seems nice, I want to have the highest level of security assurance, I use all of them straight away. Don't just blindly copy-paste those as your security requirements. There will be many different security requirements in there that are not actually applicable to you. I mentioned here as one of the examples file uploads. Maybe your application doesn't even have a file upload functionality. This basically removes a full chapter of the document. There are, of course, things that are very hard to argue with. For example, when we're talking about input validation, there might be a couple of quite intense security requirements, to be quite honest with you. But if you don't implement them, if you don't follow them, you won't have a good time. Your application will have a couple of different security vulnerabilities. So the real challenge here is not copy-paste this list blindly, but really take the effort of fine-tuning which requirements are necessary. And if you finally realize that you actually need 150 different security requirements and that's too much, you need to consider if you are up to the task of implementing a secure application based on the protection profile that you're actually following. But it's very much more likely that you are just having a lot of content in there that could be removed.
So scrolling through and maybe selecting the first ones to start with and then go your way.
Definitely start with the level 1 requirements. Those are the most important basic requirements and work from there. That's definitely a good initial approach. And just make a very quick, brief check if this is even applicable for your application.
Yeah, thank you.
How do your clients apply the ASVS guidelines in the development process, tools and processes, if you have some?
Sorry, again?
How do your clients apply the ASVS guidelines in the development process?
How do they apply it? What my recommendation usually is address them first in the requirements engineering phase. I highly encourage them to have security requirements based on ASVS and then go from there. Basically, for each requirement, and the first question was addressing there are so many requirements and they are overwhelming and that's why they are not followed. Many of them might be also overwhelming because implementation guidance is not given. So it's really crucial to take those requirements, make sure that take the requirements, make sure that the implementation guidance is properly linked, maybe even have some things, if you're doing this regularly, if it's not a single project you're working on, to establish some kind of standard patterns for these implementations, because let's stick with upload. For this example, we have some upload vulnerabilities. We don't want to have maybe some kind of zip bombs when someone uploads a zip file, and we don't want to have many other things that are specified in the OWASP ASVS. You can expect that upload in a secure fashion will not be a one-time thing. There will be many instances when you need a secure upload functionality. So taking the time once to implement this in a proper fashion, provided as part of your development framework, costs you something initially, but you can use this over and over again, which basically helps you to reduce the effort later on. So it's often this initial hurdle to say, when I'm starting at 0, I can't expect to be at 10 within a couple of weeks. It's a structured challenge to go from 0 to 10 over time and build upon the different building blocks that you are developing. So I'm actually quite sure that I didn't answer the question.
But you said
how are my customers using this? Yes, exactly, that's the way how they are using it. So they have the security requirements in place, and they actually try to find the right frameworks or adapt their own frameworks for implementation. And usually when it comes to actual verification, a handful or a small group has their own security testers who are doing this, or actually working on a testing group who are doing this. Many of those are actually addressing us because we are offering the service and outsource this to us.
So we already talked a bit about challenges when dev teams apply it. So, but from your experience, are there any other challenges besides that it's a lot and where to start, but that you saw that dev teams have when they applied, and how do they solve it? So how do they cope with them?
Actual challenge, the main challenge is also relates to the first question. It was a really good one. Is the size of the document and the amount. And of course, I've mentioned there are deadlines in projects. And unfortunately, I, as a security guy, of course, I want to be security the most important topic. But there are many, many other important topics. The deadline is probably the most important topic. So making sure that all that's required from ASVS fit into your very, very tight schedule and actually implement it in a proper fashion is probably the most crucial issue people are facing. And that's where you have to talk with the project leader to the project sponsor and see. It will usually be a trade-off. If you can't do all of it, at least do the most important things of it. So you really need to consider, you need to slice it up in a way that's working for you so that you get the most out of your application security initiative while not going overboard when we're talking about budgets, deadlines. And the second big problem I'm seeing quite often is just a lack of expertise. When you're it sounds great, but I'm here in front of you and say, wow, there are so many different, very easy to understand requirements, and there is this guidance here and guidance there. If you haven't implemented security before, this can be quite challenging. So my recommendation is, and I think Tanya talked about this yesterday, having security champions in place to basically have some people in the team, in the trenches down there who can help all the developers with actually understanding and implementing this. It's very, very helpful to get the ball rolling and spread the knowledge over time. And that's also something that you build upon. You start out with a handful of very well-versed security experts and you distribute the knowledge over time in the whole team.
I mean, you directly also tackled the point resources, time, which is a big step here, a big part here. The question was, if you take like a, let's say, medium-sized company with a development team, like I would say like the normal customer probably you would have, how much time would it take to really implement such a certificate? Or is there no real answer to that one?
Yeah, you gave the answer away. There's no real answer to this one because there are so many aspects to consider. Of course, it depends a lot on the size of the application, the amount of relevant security requirements that are actually applicable to your application. But of course, we are free to dream and we are free to guess. Let's assume we have an application with several 100,000 lines of code and we have a development team, let's say we have 50 people. I would say it would be really nice to have at least 3 to 4 security champions in there spread across the different functions and having all the proper processes already in place. I would say 2 FTE over the life cycle of the project. So basically, something like 5 to 10%. We security people are always tending to take the higher numbers, but I would say if you have 5% of your resources for security and the proper process in place, you can, it sounds like not much, but it's also, you can achieve a lot by just investing 5%, but my recommendation, of course, would definitely be more because more people, more experts can do a lot more overall, but 5 to 10% I think would be a good recommendation. If you achieve 5, you're already good to go, to be honest.
So no direct time frame? no direct time frame.
To do the certification.
Yeah, to do the certification.
To do the actual certification. Yeah. I was thinking about the implementation. When we're talking about the certification, it depends if you're doing the assessment itself will probably take, I would guesstimate something around 20 to 30% from the auditing teams, and thinking about the effort from the developers might be in the ballpark of a couple of workshops. So depending how many people from different areas you need, maybe also something like 5 to 10 days of effort, including support and project management. So everything together, 30 to 50%. I know it's really, really broad, but there are many parameters to consider.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Maybe a question or also to the time, because we talked about that before. So there's a question, which tools can you recommend for checking at least some points of the ASVS checklist, at least semi-automatically?
Yeah, so first of all, there are many SAST tools, static application security testing tools out there. I'm also very hesitant to give out any names. Of course, I have my personal favorites. Unfortunately, I have to say those are usually the most expensive one as well. But there are a couple of free tools available, even from OWASP. You can use many free versions like the OWASP SAP proxy or the free version of the Burp Suite. You can semi-automatically check some things. You can use those tools to manually do a lot of those checks if you have the proper expertise. And talking about static code analysis tools, you have the big names usually, or I said I don't want to name any names, but if you're there's a cool resource from OWASP as well. Just Google for OWASP and SAST, you will get a very prominent list of different static code analysis tools. And you need, the actual task you need to do is selecting the proper tool for you, because it really depends on your technology stack. It must fit your technology stack, first of all. And it must fit your specific requirements. Like maybe there's some kind of scanner that's really fine-tuned on these file upload vulnerabilities, but you don't have any file uploads in place. Might not be the right tool for you. That's a very specific example, but the selection process is an important one. But the acronym we're looking for is SAST, Static Application Security Testing, can at least verify parts of these requirements.
The next question would be, does ASVS certification become tricky in agile projects? Some of the bullet points you showed seem more like waterfall or iterative app development with one release.
No, I don't see any problems with implementing this type of certification in an agile approach. We have, when we're talking about application security auditing in an agile environment, we have one specific problem all the time. It's independent of certification or not certification. You have, at a moment in time, your application and you want to have it security checked. The time windows for your security check, if they're not fully automated, are usually too small to do a proper security audit. So you need to find a way to slice your security testing activities in a way to fit it into your agile workflow to get it in there. And sometimes even accept to be in production at a time where not the full application is fully audited, because you want to release that quickly. That might be an issue, but an application that needs to be released so frequently and so quickly that you don't have the time for a proper security audit might not be the right target for such type of certification. We're talking here about applications who need a really high protection profile, who really need a high level of assurance, and in this case you need to take the time to do this proper assessment, and there we don't have any real issues. So I've done this type of certifications based on other standards in the past, and the development methodology is usually not a real problem.
Okay, so maybe the last question, the certification framework, is it an OWASP project or a sec4dev project? This was a question.
We will start it at SecConsult, basically, as this will be the nugget, but in the end, when it's an open framework, it will be based on OWASP.
Yeah,
So we don't have the interest to have the SecConsult star out there on this open framework. Wouldn't be quite open framework if that's the case, yeah.
That's nice. So as there were a lot of questions, I guess a lot of people will write you an email next week when they scroll through the certificate, through the checklist. So thank with me again, Thomas.
Thank you.